Okay, here we are in Landisburg, and this is the area I'm currently working on. I am finishing laying the tracks all at least into here, and then I'll start working down into the drying yard, which is where I have to come over here and make a few decisions. And as you can see, I have a mess here to clean up. I have to finish work on the backdrop. Originally, I was going to end it back there, but I'm going to wrap it around here. So I'm just going to fill up this wall here to blend that into that backdrop, and I'm just going to paint the existing wall here and not put up any masonite down there. I'm going to probably have like an engine shop simulated right here somewhere, but I'm going to kind of wait on that till later this week so I can clean up this track laying mess and get this all out of here. What I've done in here is laid rail, but I've run out of rail and I've run out of spikes. So I'm waiting for some of those to show up. Up here, what I plan on doing today is to finish altering that line right there. If you look way up there, there's a board that sticks out. That was originally put in there when this curved sharper that way, and there was actually a perfect alignment up to that track right there. But when I decided I wanted to put a building in right here, I needed this to move out. And when I first laid this in here, that was and still is going to be hidden. But I don't like that little dog leg in there. And I think if I just get my reciprocating saw, I'm just going to saw out that little brace there. I'm going to try to break the flex track free of the road bed and just straighten that out right there. I still haven't made the changes. That's the line going to cliff top. I'm still going to make a change in there that I talked about, but I'm going to wait till all the other track is in and then go back to make any track. So the other thing you can see is I've got the ceiling all marked out with blue tape where all the joists are, so I can put these boards in. And then I will go ahead and put the valance pieces up in here. And then I'm going to get the LED lights up in here because right now the only light up in here is a room light. And I need to get some more light because it's been hard to lay tracks up here. Still not much has changed in cliff top. I did make a few more mock-up structures. Maybe I talked about those. I'd have to look at the old videotape to figure out. I'm also been using some different coal here I got. Here's the original coal. This is aquarium rock, and this stuff here I was originally using is really nice stuff, but it comes really coarse, and so I screen it out just to get this material out, and it's almost, maybe I get a quarter of a bag out of it, and then I have to screen this to remove the fines because this is about the smallest I like to use, or so I thought up to now anyways, because the doors can actually leak a little bit, and I didn't want coal leaking out. So these cars here won't leak anything in transit, which won't cause any switch point problems. However, I did find this stuff, and this is its largest size in the bag. This is also aquarium rock, and I have to screen this to get the fines out. I still only get about a quarter of the bag that's usable, but this stuff is a lot easier to screen because I'm only running this over a window screen to remove the fines, where this I have to screen it over a screen that I made, that I drilled a bunch of holes in it and then screen that again, and it's a lot of work just to get this little bit of coal, and I'm going to need a little more coal, so I'm going to need probably another bag's worth of it here to fill up all these cars. But I'm testing this arrangement out here now that I have the dumper going. It dumps really nice. The only problem I have with it a little bit is that it's actually heavier because, as you can see, because it's a little finer, that means the load is more dense and therefore it makes more weight. And I'm already struggling a little bit with the weight of these cars here, especially if you overfill them. Normally I like to actually fill them way up over the top, but I'm finding that when I have guests over, that this is probably the safer limit to load them at. And so we'll see how that all goes. When you load cars to this height, you can actually pull one more car than you normally would if you load them higher. Ultimately, I would like to find a material that flows and looks like coal and is lighter. I think it'll cause a lot less problems down the line. And just to touch on this really quick, as you saw in the video, this was an epic build. This actually burned me out putting this thing together. I was not willing to come down for a few days and work on the layout, but it works really well. I'm having fun dumping coal again and loading coal. I've had some people come over and they really like it too. I'm going to continue working on this. I'm not really going to be in a quick hurry to build a chute down here at the Coke bin at all, because I just got other things I want to get going. I want to get all the tracks in, but this was a really fun build. If you watch that, it works really well. I like the length of it compared to the original one. It just is really neat to see a train all on there. If you look in the video, you'll see that the seam on the backdrop here, this is a trackside scenery backdrop, and the seam had spread open enough that it showed the blue line in the back. So I went and carefully peeled this up here. It's actually still up, and I've been painting, as you can see in there, a continuation and trying to make a blend of these two so that you can't see the line when this is closed up as much. So I'm kind of working on that. What I'm doing is I'm painting behind. I'm going to glue this back down again, and then I'm going to go in here and paint the edges across here a little bit, just to kind of trick the eye that it can't see that seam. Down here, where there's the other seam, I actually knew that I needed to do that. I forgot on the first one, and this one's a little harder to see. It stayed closed, but I still have some blue showing in a few places. So I'm pulling this back a little bit and I'm painting in there, but this one actually works pretty nice. It's a lot harder to see because it's a little tighter, and I already had painted behind there. And then by the time I got down there to the one that's way down there, you can't even see that one. So I forgot to do that. I remembered on the previous layout, I had all my seams painted on the backdrop. Usually just some quick black and greens, just kind of randomly slapped on there, works really well. You'll never get the seams perfectly tight. I mean, you can get them really tight, but there is seasonal movement that makes them open and close just a tiny little bit. So it's best just to paint back there a dark color, and then paint the edge of the backdrop a dark color as well, because you can see the paper edge on those, especially if you trim like I do up there. I paint all those. I actually take the blue color on a sponge and I just dabble on the top cut line to help that kind of become more invisible. So today, the other thing I'm going to do after I cut out that piece over there in Landisburg is I'm going to put in the bench work underneath the staging yard here, kind of clear out all this temporary stuff in here, and just going to make sure this is level. I got the wood. I'm going to kind of just frame all this in right in place. It doesn't have to be super strong because it's only holding up a logging train that comes in here periodically. Now, if you've been following me on Facebook, you know I've been working on a few other things on the side here. One of them is the coupler conversion back to Kadee couplers. And what I've done is I've made some coupler boxes for the Kadee 803 coupler, and I've made these little blocks that go in the coupler to get rid of the slack action. And if you look at a Kadee coupler here, so this would be the 803 coupler right here. The way they work, if you're not familiar with them, is they have this little block in the front here that looks like a letter, like a V. And what it does is it rides inside of their coupler box, and it rides inside of this little slot right here, and a spring sits inside of the shank hole there to keep the coupler back in the box this way, and that's what centers it. So the coupler actually pivots like this, and as you can see, it kind of moves away from that center peg in there, the center pivot point. And when the train is moving, what happens is that the coupler actually springs out a little bit, and it causes like this kind of slack movement in the train. And what's really annoying is that the spring in here is pretty light. And I've heard of people putting a stronger spring in there or stretching the spring. And I've actually gone in there and put a piece of styrene to reduce the amount of space in this so the spring has more force. But on my loaded cars, what's happening is they're so heavy that when the train moves, it pulls this all the way out. And then when the train goes downhill, the cars run into this center pivot point there, and they all bunch up, and then they all pull back out, and then they all bunch up, and they all pull back out. So the train goes down the hill like an accordion, and it's really annoying to watch. So what I've done is I've made these blocks right here, and they fill that space. So I snap them in there, and I can just break them off, and they fill that space inside the coupler so that the space that's left can no longer move end to end. And I've also go ahead and I shave off that little piece on the bottom right there so the coupler's flat. I've got one here that's already been done. And so this one here has the bottom shaved off. I'll maybe do another video on how all this goes together, but what happens is with that block in there, I'll put one in here quick. On one of my coupler boxes, now there's no space in here for that piece to ride, so this will sit in there, and now it just has a pivot like a normal coupler would. To center it, I modify a KD number 5 centering spring, and I think they actually have a number. They have so it's a 634. It's a whole pack of them. And they modify pretty easy, but what it does is it helps now have another centering spring just like a KD number 5 would. And what I get is I don't get that in and out motion anymore of the coupler in the box here. There's a little bit, but there's not a lot. It barely moves in there. And then I'm going back and taking out all the Surgent couplers and replacing them with these because those are just too hard to use in an operating session. These just work too good. I started working on a design for my own couplers, but I've just got so many things to do that this was the faster solution, was just to make these new coupler boxes and go back to using KDs for now. So I'm in the process of doing that. I think I had like 5 more of my cars to convert over, and then those will all be done. And then all my new cars for a while are just going to have this box. What's nice about this box is it actually is the exact same size as a KD box, so that everything I have can be either a KD, a Surgeon, this, or whatever I designed after the fact. It'll all fit in the same space. So that's one little project I have going on. So if you've been following me on Facebook, you know I've had a freight car truck project going on here, and that's to design a Russell truck. And the Russell trucks were common in the East, and there's none made really for that. So what I did is I designed this truck here. This is a log car truck. You can see that the upper bolster here is long. I have here's a freight car version of it here, and here's the logging car version. And you can see, if I can hold these two, this one has the longer upper bolster, and the bearing blocks are on the outside, and these would ride on the bottom of the log bunks. This one is the standard one with the bearing blocks on the inside, and this is a lot shorter. It's the same as the bottom. And so I've designed these up. They're really highly detailed. I really like them a lot. I'm actually trying to paint these here. So I painted this middle to simulate wood, and then I painted this black, and now I'm going to just brush paint all the little detail parts in here, because the details on these is really nice. If you look in there, it's probably hard to see, but if you look at my Facebook pictures, or I'll try to post some pictures on this video here of what they look like. The other thing is, of these 2 trucks, I also have 2 types. I have one with brakes and one without, because on the log cars on one end, they didn't have brakes. So here's one without. You can see the bottom bolster is solid. And here's one that will accept brakes. Now, technically, I could use the same one and just not put brakes on it, but I decided it's easy enough just to print 2. And the way the ones with the brakes work is, here's a set of the brakes, and they just push into those, and I'll glue them in there after they're painted, but they push into those blocks. And what it does is it makes the brake beams out here that ride with the trucks. Now, what is nicer, or what's more prototypical, is these are actually hanging from the car, but my cars and most model cars the trucks have to pivot more on the model than they do on the prototype. And those chains would just, while they would be great for a contest model, in operation, they just would be a nightmare to have to hook up and then have to, have them move enough that they move with the trucks, and then the trucks would pivot enough. The other thing I did is I did a video on how I converted the wheel sets over. So these are KD Owen 30 wheel sets that I have modified to be Owen 3, and they are modified to be able to fit into my trucks. They snap in from the bottom, and I do actually put brass bearings in there, but that's how the truck will look. And then this will be the brakes will go on the bottom here. And so that's really kind of what they're going to look like on there. Also, what I've been doing is I've been designing some freight cars, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I'm just going to kind of show you how that all is going to fit on there. So this is the end with the brakes, because it has these beams. These would typically have a chain kind of link hanging down there. But that's how the brake end car will look. So while we're on the subject of these cars, this is a 3D printed log car. I also have the frame for a 3D printed flat car. And the reason for these is to provide some rolling stock quickly while I wait for the time to be able to scratch build better cars. My goal is to have all my cars scratch built out of wood. It's just one of those things I like to do. But the reality is that if I want to get up and operating, I'm going to need some cars as stand-ins, and they just don't make cars that I need for stand-ins. So I'm making my own 3D printed stand-ins. And these designs are not meant to be, long term. Obviously, I don't have the wood grain in them. I'm just going to come up with a way to paint them to make them look wood grainy-ish, and not worry about making any wood grain. The details are just enough to suggest details, but they're not these highly, accurate contest-winning cars. The log cars themselves are printed with cavities in the bottom. You can see the bottom of the bunks are hollow, which I will fill with probably some of that low melting metal. I have some tungsten powder I can put in there, and then glue a piece of styrene on the bottom. The centers of all the frame members on this and on the flat car are printed hollow, which I glue in steel music wire. And the steel music wire does add a little bit of weight, but what it really does is it keeps them from sagging. This car is extremely strong in the middle here, and you can see the flat car is just laser flat. And I glue those in with just some of this E6000 adhesive. It's like kind of a rubbery adhesive. You can see actually it even says flexible. It grabs the resin really well. It grabs the rods really well. I just roll on a thin film on these and push them in. Then I put the car upside down on some wax paper and put a couple weights on it and wait about an hour, and the cars are ready to go. So these will be my stand-in cars. This flat car, the grooves are on the top because there'll be a deck on top. On the log cars, all the grooves are on the bottom because you have to see the top of the deck. I plan on making about 8 or 10 of these and maybe about 16 of these here. So I need to get these ready to go. These are also all designed to use my Russell trucks here, and they also use my coupler boxes. Let's see if I have one here off the... So this coupler box here that I designed will actually fit inside of there, so I can actually have my KD coupler design as well. So this will be a quick way for me to fill up my roster with cars so we can start operating before I do scenery, so that problems in the layout can surface now when they're easier to catch. Okay, I just finished getting the bench work all up there for the staging yard. It's not the prettiest work I've ever done, but it was a difficult area to work in. I basically framed it all in place because there was no way to get full pieces of wood up in there. Basically these 2x2s up here, you can see they attach to these joists to give me some random places where I could drop some hangers down here, made out of 1x2s, and then attach them to this framework. This piece here is one long piece that runs all the way from the front side here to the back side over there, because this thing kind of comes across here and it turns to go over to this wall and then goes behind all the piping there for the water heater. So it's a little bit tricky to get it up in there and get it all level, and but it's in. I gotta finish the wiring up here for the dimmer lights over at the gorge scene, but right now I am going to shift gears and go over and cut out that piece over there at Landisburg so I can realign the track and get that lighting valance up. Okay, well, I'm out here in the shop and I thought I'd show you something I did here real quick. This is a conversion I did for my jigsaw. I saw this somewhere. It's a zero clearance plate, and it's just a simple piece of 1/2-inch plywood that I just countersunk some screw holes into and drilled some holes into the base here of the jigsaw. And then so what I did for this slot here is I just put the jigsaw base down on something and I ran this board through it so that slot was perfectly centered so that these edges are flush on both sides here. And what this does is when you cut, it prevents tear out. I always hated cutting plywood because it leaves such a bad surface. It just tears everything up. And then if you try to go to a really fine blade to reduce that, it just takes forever to cut. So you can see the blade I've got here is relatively aggressive, but if you look at the cuts on the edge of the plywood here, even going across the grain here, usually that's the worst part, is when you go across the grain, you get a lot of tear out. And it just leaves such a nice edge on this stuff. I also find it easier to follow the edge because now there's a line, right in the front where I'm cutting. I can look down and I can follow that line really easily there when I'm cutting, and I get much better cuts. Most of the time when I'm trying to do a jigsaw is the material's flying up out of this space right here, so I can't look down, and as much as I try to follow these grooves here, there's so much material coming out you can't see. Well, this prevents all that. Nothing's flying out of the front there. It does build up an edge like a plow, like when you're going along there, it starts to build up an edge of sawdust, but I just gently just keep blowing that away and I can see fine. So I highly suggest you make one of these if you're going to do plywood sub-road bed. And you might think, well, why am I doing plywood sub-road bed when most of my layout is spline? Well, it's because going into cliff top there, it's going to be easier, I think, to thread in this piece of road bed that's going to be for the change I'm making, because I had to kind of go through a hole in the backdrop, and it was easier to do that when there was no backdrop there, but now that the backdrop's in place, I'm having a little bit of a struggle. So this piece I'm going to just make all up. I'm actually going to lay the track on it first to make sure it's in a nice smooth curve, and then I'm going to fish it through that hole, and I'll lay tracks off of both ends. So what I did here now is I've got the road bed cut, and I've got it all fit. You can see some of the other pieces down here. And now I'm going to go ahead and cut that piece of homo soap by using these as patterns. And I've got a crazy blade that I bought for that, sitting right over here. It's this blade. It's actually made for foam cutting, but it cuts homo soap with no dust, and it cuts it with a really clean edge. So I'll get this marked up and I'll show you what the edge looks like when I'm cutting with this. Okay, you can see here I've got the blade of death installed in the jigsaw, and I've already cut some of the homo soap here. I've got everything outlined with blue marker here so it's easy to see. And because I have outlined the pieces of plywood, I'm going to make sure I want to cut, you can see here on the inside. And here's the cut that this thing makes. It's a really nice clean cut. There's just no dust from it whatsoever. You do have to push down a little harder because there is no action of the teeth kind of pulling the saw into the material. So so the saw can jump up and down if you're not putting pressure down on it. And what I find actually is I've used this blade without this zero clearance plate before, and the blade tends to want to wander a little bit this way. But I'm finding that this plywood on here actually gives a little more support right at the cut right there, and I'm not finding it as difficult to follow lines. One of the things I've done here when I've traced these out is this is the end of this piece of road bed, but all of them I extended out a little farther so that I can decide down on the layout where I want the splices to be made. For example, this one extends this way, but the piece that's coming in here also extends this way. And so when I get to the spot, I'll just clamp all this down, and then that way I can get all this road bed centered on top of the plywood sub road bed, and then I'll just mark the cuts and cut them across with a utility knife in place, and then the seams will be nice and tight. Well, here we are, the last day that I get to work on the layout for 2023. It's December 31st. And a lot of things have gone on here in Landisburg, some unexpected changes, but we'll start back here with this bridge. And you can see I put some plaster work in here. I had to take out this piece of cork in here because I finally laid out how I think I'm going to do the tracks in here. And you can see I've done it many different times, and currently the red is the version I'm going to go with now. And to make that work out, there's actually going to be a track that curves right along the edge of the creek here, and then one right there. And those had to be on a turnout that I actually had to start. The points are going to be right here, and you can see it's going to go, and the frog will be somewhere like right about, here. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to put this bridge in. So I'm going to have to build this bridge, and I'm going to have to actually finish the scenery right underneath here, at least in the area of the bridge, because the bridge will be permanent. It won't be like the other bridges where I'll take it out to do the scenery. So I continued the plaster work back far enough so it's easier to blend. I will actually bring this around. I just wanted to wait till this was in here exactly in the right spot to know where to bring it down to. So I'll finish this up here before I put in any kind of finished scenery in here. I still have a little bit of blending in to do in here. But that was kind of unexpected. I thought that this would just be a single little bridge in here. It's going to be neat to look at. There'll be another turnout that'll start right, I think the points start right here, and they go off to that track, and then this will come around, and it goes off down there to 2 tracks. So there's five loading tracks. So there'll be, wood piles here, wood here and here, and I've spaced these enough that I can get a condensed version of that raised boardwalk that they have in here that they use. I think it's like 15 feet off the ground. The lumber piles will be 30 feet high. And then I've got another one that'll be coming down and kind of ending here. I think I'll have it come through here on one side so I can bring these lumber piles farther down here. And then I'll have some over on this side here too. Maybe I'll have like timbers or something in here. Get my coffee cup out of the way here. The only issue I've got here is that to make the curve in here to get into the engine house, I've actually have to have like a switchback right here. It's not the end of the world. It wasn't exactly what I'd hoped, but it still works out pretty good. Now, if we continue on up here, you can see I've been putting into some of the scenery in here, trying to get rid of some of this ugly roadbed that's been butchered in here. And I got a little carried away too here, and I kind of went all the way down the side here. And what's kind of interesting here is that, so this would be representative of Laurel Creek, which would run into Glade Creek. Technically, Glade Creek would have been on that side, but if I put it on this side, what it does is that it keeps the front of the benchwork low, and I don't really have to put tall trees in here. I can just put shrubbery on here, and it's a good explanation of why there's no scenery in these wider areas, because I don't want anything here. No scale, even a small tree would be like that tall and be hard to see past it. So I put this all in here. So this is the same level as that back there. So you can see how much lower that is. And as that comes up, but what actually happens here too is that there's a slight grade that starts in the yard right about here, and it goes up out of here. So there's actually more height from here. As you can see, the creek kind of comes in here. There's even more height there than there is right here. But my cars don't roll out of here. I already had some in here, and they sit in here just fine. I don't have very free rolling cars. I'm not a fan of free rolling cars. I've trimmed this off back here nice, and I'm extending this backdrop down here because the scenery actually falls off down here, which is where Glade Creek would have been. But I'm still going to simulate that falling off because the store would have had a lower level down there. Again, that's not the store I'm going to use. It's just a store I had from the old layout. That's just a mock-up of a 2-story building, but this one will be 1 story on this, dropping down to 2 stories. But probably the big change that happened in here where I got a little bit crazy is I actually cut out the backdrop right here. And the reason why I did that is I was just having a hard time figuring out how I was going to hide that hole so close to these buildings that'll be coming in here. And then the other thing is that the switch lead would have been really short. So the backdrop actually was connected right here, and it came across the tracks right here. And you can see I've only got about an engine length from here to these points. And I just don't like switching into a tunnel, especially switching into one that's just a hole in the backdrop. I don't have a choice over there at Sewell where it comes onto the dump trestle, because that's the benchwork ends there anyways, and it goes into a lift bridge. So no matter what would have happened there, it would have been odd, and having the hole there was the least odd solution to that. But here, it would have been hard because the only way to really visually hide it, because you're looking straight into it, this is your view of it. There's no way to put any view block here, because then it just makes uncoupling here difficult. The only way would have been to put a tunnel there, and there is no tunnel there. So I decided that the better solution would be to open this up Now, if I had designed it this way, I wouldn't have had this here. I would have had this go straight across over there. And you know, there's still part of me that thinks maybe I might do that, even though that's all nicely finished up in there. And, you know, I'm going to get a shelving in there, some shelves in there. But I have an idea what I can do here. I think I can get some scenery in here and maybe make it not look so bad. I'll have it kind of wrap around here. And you know, there is that scene there. It's still there today. There's a paved road where the rockwork hangs over in Landisburg. You know, it's actually in the park now, but it was on the way to Landisburg. And then I can have trees actually kind of coming out of the top of this thing here. And it might make that not look so visually odd to have that sharp curve here. I'm actually water forming this around here. I've been wetting that thing and then gradually increasing these clamps. And it's pretty much to the end point here now. And I'll put a board back in here to attach this and then just fill this little last, you know, 1.5-inch gap there. But one of the things that this really solves too, aside from the hole, is that as an operator now, I can run a train out of Landisburg all the way up and stop it right there. And that is actually the farthest you can go before you follow the turnout out of the junction. And so what that means is when you want to leave Landisburg, you can run up till you see your engine get to be right about there, stop it, because you'd have to stop it there anyways. And then, you know, walk down and go around and up to that other side over there where you can then throw the turnout and then continue on. The other thing it does is it allows me to see when operators coming out of cliff top are setting off cars there, if they're doubling the climb out of cliff top there. Again, the climb out of cliff top's not prototypical, but I did it to lower cliff top to make it more operation friendly. There is a little bit of grade coming out of Landisburg here too, but it's not quite as long. You know, doesn't fall off quite as far right here. And I'm not pulling loaded coal trains out of here either. I do like this. I think this looks good here. I'll have a hill that'll come down, you know, it'll start from the backdrop here and it'll kind of come out away. And what'll be neat is I'll make it out of foam and I'll scenic the other side of it so that when you look through that hole, it'll actually now be lit here. Before, when this was all hidden, there would be this dark spot in here. Now the lighting will actually make this the same brightness or whatever you want to say as the other side. So it'll help hide that hole. There'll still be the top edge of the hole on the other side, but if I use the trackside scenery backdrop across there and blend that in with the scenery here, that edge won't be quite as noticeable. You know, I have the opportunity to put high scenery on the other side there to kind of hide that opening even better on that side. You can't get as good of a look at it as you can get it here. So that hill will kind of come down through here, and then another hill will start right over here and cover that hole, and it's actually going to go all the way up and meet that where the fascia comes in and follow that down, so that'll come down into here. What's interesting about this backdrop here is that the face of it here wraps around and it actually becomes the fascia on the other side of the wall there. So that's one piece that kind of comes down, then it goes down and it goes down the edge of the benchwork on the other side there. So it worked out actually really well. I hadn't planned on it, but it worked out well. This is a 4-inch piece of masonite up in here that I'm going to drop down. I think I'm going to come down to 6 inches because now you can see the edge of the lighting valance right there. So I think I'm going to bring that down a little bit more and I'll just paint that all blue up in there. I'm also going to move it back because that edge you see right there, that's the 1/4-inch drywall that I put on the scenery or on the ceiling out there to hide the texturing since you're up so high in there. And then the backdrop on that side, remember, wraps around down there. So I had to blend it up into that. And if I didn't want to have that there, I'd have to bring this all the way into Landisburg. And at this point, that's just not going to be a real possibility because of all this crazy cuts and filling I'd have to do. So that valance is just sitting right there because that's where I wedged it in where it wouldn't fall, but it will actually be back attached to the edge of that 1/4-inch drywall up there. So the lights are disconnected here because I had to cut the wires on the other side and bring them back out because the hole that they originally went through was in that backdrop that I now curved back around that way. So really the scene doesn't look much different up here. Again, this is actually the backdrop of the other side. And I put this hole in here because there's a 2x2 back here. And I found that this has been a really nice place when you're coming down the stairs here to put your hand and walk down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually 3D print out of ABS an insert that comes in here, has a nice rounded edge in there. And so there'll be a nice soft edge to put your hand in there when you're going down the stairs there. And as you saw earlier, I did cut out all the road bed for the cliff top change. You can see this piece of plywood is sitting in here. And this is where I decided to make the split in it, and I will put Homosoda on that, and I'm going to fix the joint down over here where it ends. So I'm going to cut the spline and sink this down in right here so that the Homosoda that'll be on the top of this will have a kind of a tongue that hangs over, and it'll make like an overlapping joint. I'm going to take all the rails and tracks out up to this stack of magnets here, because this is where the wire ends that's inside of the road bed. And I'm going to continue that down all the way down the hill and come down over and end it somewhere down here on the level spot. That'll help the traction of the resin printed shays when they're pulling the loaded coal trains out of here. I chose 1/2-inch plywood. I normally use 3/4 when I'm doing this kind of stuff, but I use 1/2-inch here because the 1/2-inch of this and the 1/2-inch Homosoda makes obviously a 1-inch thickness, and that 1-inch thickness is what I need to get the grade to be right when it comes across the edge of that benchwork up there, so that this doesn't have a hump right here. And so it'll be fine. I actually don't use 16-inch spacing. A lot of this spacing is 14 or less. There's some in here where it's only 12 inches, so I think it'll be stiff enough. I'm not worried about it having sags in here.